Hey ho again, part two of our flipped lesson of Palooza. So the first part, if you haven't watched it, watch this one first, then, and go back and watch the other one. Is about the nine main points of Washington's farewell address. This is something that we talked about in class. The four amendments that I want you to know, and just briefly from the Bill of Rights. So they are the First Amendment, which covers the five basic freedoms entitled to all people. Freedom of religion, that is not freedom of worship. Now, there's a big difference here, which I will explain in a moment. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, which is media of any kind, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition. So, what are each of these sort of briefly individually? First of all, you have to understand these freedoms are within reason. You really are probably, well, okay, I'll just be very blunt. You cannot actively engage in a religion that involves blood rituals legally. So if your religion involves harming people or things to sacrifice to something that demands blood, that's going to be a no-no. Okay. Now, I said it's freedom of religion, not freedom of worship. What is the difference? Freedom of worship is that you are allowed to believe whatever you want, and you can go to whatever church, temple, mosque, synagogue, whatever you want, house, but your religion stays there. You can have your services and ceremonies, but they stay in the place of worship and you leave them there. You do not take them with you in your everyday life. Freedom of religion is the idea that your religious views and beliefs are allowed to dictate how you live your life and interact with others. This is again based on the idea of the necessity of religion and morality to have a stable government with good laws. Freedom of worship restricts your ability to exercise religion freely. Freedom of religion, you are allowed to act in a way in accordance with your conscience. Now, the First Amendment says that the government cannot restrict religion nor can it impose it. So, what does that mean? People interpret that to mean that the government will say that that the government can't tell you you have to have religion. So obviously, what I'm saying is then wrong. Well, that's not true. By saying the government cannot impose religion, it means that the government cannot make religious requirements in order to serve in government or to hold public office. So, for example, back in the day in England, if you were not Anglican, the Church of England, you could not hold religious office. And to take it one step further, if you were Catholic, you were actually forbidden from holding public office. The First Amendment prevents the government from being able to do that. So that also takes it to the extent of the government cannot say that you can't believe in things as a disqualifier from public office. So just because you happen to be, say, Jewish, the government cannot say you're not qualified to run for public office because they don't like the fact that you believe in what the Jews teach. Secondly, freedom of speech. You are allowed to say or comment on anything provided it is not harmful or a lie. If what you say causes harm to other people or could potentially be dangerous, like, screaming armed shooter in a theater where there would be a stampede and people might get hurt, you can't do that. Now, where we're having problems right now is this weird gray area of what defines hate speech. Um, and I'm not going to go into detail about that, but there is there is an argument to be made that you should be able to restrict the rights of people to say things that are deliberately hateful and could incite hatred of other people by what they are. You just have to be really careful about how far you go with that. Next, freedom of the press or media. The press is allowed to publish stories and report the news. What they cannot do is publish false information. And if they do, they can be held accountable for it in a court of law. You have the freedom to assemble peacefully. Random mobs running through the streets, breaking windows, burning cars, or stealing property because they're angry that their team did not win a title in something, or because they're angry about a situation, is not peaceably assembling. That's a riot. That's a mob that needs to be put down. Finally, you have the right to petition the government to change things. You can ask the government to change things. The second, the right to own guns. Now, this one is highly controversial because both sides, that would be politically liberal people and politically conservative people, tend to only look at half of the amendment. The amendment says a well regulated militia being necessary for a free state, the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed. So this has two parts. The government cannot deny you the right to own guns, but the government has the right to regulate what kind of guns you own. So there you go. It's a both, not an either or. The Ninth Amendment. This is the one of the two just in case amendments. Rights not listed. This basically is Madison saying, look, if I didn't specifically list a right that people normally had or have, and I didn't write it down, it doesn't mean they don't have it anymore. They still do. I just didn't bother to write it out. So if you had rights in the past, they still exist now. It covers a whole wide range of stuff. Last but not least, the 10th Amendment, another just in case amendment, deals with federalism, which is a big fancy term. Federalism really is the principle of subsidiarity. So the just in case part is this. In case you're wondering who's got the power, the national government can only do what it's specifically given the power to do by the Constitution. All other powers belong to the state or the people. So these are the amendments that I want you to know. I will ask you questions about them. And by the way, right now, all of these amendments are somewhat controversial, but probably the two right now that are the biggest issues are the first and the second. The second is a perpetual ongoing problem because of the limited view that both sides take of it. Okay, well, that's it for this one. Remember to click done. And if you're watching me on YouTube, like and subscribe. Peace and love.